Good afternoon. Want to welcome everybody to the July 30th installment of the National Cyberwatch Center's webcast series. And today's discussion revolves around neurodiversity and how you can tap into this pool of talent to help meet the cybersecurity skills shortage. And excited to have both Diane and Megan with us today. Just a couple items of business before we turn it over to Diane and Megan, and everybody's doing a great job right now of keeping themselves muted. You have the ability to unmute yourselves. In terms of asking questions, we are going to keep some time towards the end of the webcast for Q&A. And if you have questions that you want to queue up before then, go ahead and use the Zoom group chat feature, and those will go to myself and Diane and Megan, excuse me, as the co-host, and we'll be sure to get to those questions. And also, we are recording this. We do make these webcasts available on our YouTube channel afterwards, and you will get an email once the recording has been made available, using the same system that you use to register for this event. In terms of this series, it's going on, I think, our 6th year now. It's the last Thursday of each month. It's an hour long. We record it, we make available, and we promote via our marketing communications efforts. The next one is August 27th, and it's all on navigating IT policies and documentation, with the focus really on IT security. So this is just a slide for us for the video that we'll produce of this. I'm your moderator. I'm the executive director and principal investigator of the National Cyberwatch Center, and I really want to turn it now over to our panelists, both Diane and Megan. So over to you two.
Okay, great. Thanks, Casey. This is Diane. Thank you so much for inviting us to speak today on this really important topic. And it's one that we're both very passionate about and are really looking forward to sharing with everyone today. Okay, if you can go to the next chart. So I'm Diane Delaney. I am the Neurodiversity at IBM Program Manager. For the past 5 years, I was the IBM Security Worldwide Talent Manager and leader of the Early Professional Cybersecurity Program. And then just about a year ago, I joined the New Caller team. And this is where our Neurodiversity at IBM, or ND at IBM program sits. And it was about the same time that I learned about IBM Security's neurodivergent hiring in our Security Operations Center in Canada, and our Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD pilot, which was held in Lansing, Michigan. And I was hoping for an opportunity to get involved with these efforts, as I have autistic family members and friends with autistic children. And that opportunity came earlier this year in March, when our ND at IBM program was formally announced, and it was announced as part of our New Caller effort. And I was asked to lead this effort for IBM. I think if you can go to the next chart, Casey, and Megan, if you could introduce yourself.
My name's Megan Roddie. I'm a threat researcher with IBM's X-Force Iris team. I got involved in kind of the autistic IBMers community when I helped co-found a group that I'll talk about later that we call the actually Autistic Task Force. Prior to that, I have spoken at several security conferences on neurodivergent hiring in the security industry. So this is a topic I'm pretty passionate about and talk about. In terms of my professional background, my education is in cybersecurity, and that's where I work now. I've been in the industry for about 4 to 5 years now. And yeah, I'm looking forward to presenting. This is a topic I'm definitely very passionate about, and I'm glad that I was invited to join.
Great, thank you. All right, so I think everyone on this webinar is well aware of the severe shortage of cybersecurity skills today and what we'll face in the near future. We're all having trouble finding cyber talent, and companies are needing to find talent outside of traditional places, such as the recent college graduates, because there's just not enough students studying cybersecurity to fill all the open positions. IBM has established several new collar talent programs. One of them is apprenticeships, and you may have heard our coworker Jennifer Otto speak about this a few months ago on the March webinar. We also have a tech reentry program for people who've been out of the workforce for 2 or more years. And then our most recent is our Neurodiversity at IBM program. And we feel that this untapped talent pool is really going to help us with the cyber skills gap. So today I'm going to share IBM's neurodiversity journey and how we're seeking out this talent that has the strengths that we look for in cybersecurity, which will not only help us solve the skills gap, but it's going to help us to create more diverse teams, making us stronger and more innovative. After that, Megan is going to share her story as an IBM cybersecurity professional and how her neurodiversity has helped her be successful as a cyber threat researcher. And then, as Casey mentioned, we're going to leave time at the end for Q&A. So if you can just hold your questions or put them in the chat for us, and we'll take them at the end of this webinar. All right, next chart. Okay, so I'm going to start with the basics, and that's what is neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is a concept where neurological differences are to be recognized and respected as any other human variation. These differences can include autism, attention deficit hyperactivity, dyslexia, and other neurological differences. Next chart, please. And I'm going to briefly take you through IBM's neurodiversity journey, beginning about 5 years ago, when a coworker of mine, Paul Austin, attended the United Nations Autism Awareness Day. And this is where he learned about what other companies like EY, Microsoft, and SAP, to name a few, what they were doing, and he decided IBM needed to do something. So he came back and he started IBM on our journey, and he did this by creating the Autism as a Skill business resource group with about 50 autistic employees and allies. And then fast forward to 2016, he met Andrew Williams from our IBM Australia team with a similar passion. So together, they worked to build autism awareness, and they grew the BRG to 500 people globally. They also got an agreement signed with Specialist Sterna. Specialist Sterna is an NGO that works with companies wanting to hire neurodivergent people. They provide support in the planning, training, sourcing, assessing, and then transitioning of employees. And their end goal is to prepare companies to be able to do this on their own and not be dependent on them. At the end of 2017, we were able to hire 6 neurodivergent individuals in Lansing, Michigan. And this was part of a very successful ASD pilot, and it was with the help of Specialist Sterna. In 2018, they rebranded the autism program to be Neurodiversity at IBM, expanding beyond just autism to include all neurological differences. They recognize the importance of securing an executive sponsor and the need for a business case to support additional program hiring. And that year, IBM and Wired magazine created a 14-minute documentary, which is called When Neurodiversity Works. And this documentary highlights 4 of the individuals from the ASD pilot in Lansing. And it's only 14 minutes. I highly recommend that everybody take a look at this video. It's on YouTube, and we've got a resources chart at the end of the presentation, and we'll share the link to it there. Okay, so in 2018, we took steps forward, but unfortunately, we didn't do any ND program hiring. And you may have noticed I've said program hiring. So we have neurodiverse employees like Megan, who joined IBM in early 2019, that joined through our regular hiring process. Many neurodiverse people do this and are very successful. And you'll hear shortly from her about all her successes since joining IBM. But some people need some additional help. And this is where Specialist Sterna has come in to help companies with their hiring programs. Shortly after Megan joined IBM, she and Bill Dush co-founded IBM's Actually Autistic Task Force, which she mentioned earlier. And Megan, would you like to say a few words about that task force now?
Yeah, sure. So Basically, when in the wider conversation with the neurodiversity at IBM group, I met another individual who's talking openly about being autistic. And we knew there's probably a bunch of others that were and just weren't saying it publicly because a lot of people aren't comfortable with that right now. So we discussed starting a kind of subgroup that would create a so-called safe space for actually autistic IBMers to meet and chat. And so in our case, the main communication channel is a Slack channel where we can talk, and we've got the mutual respect of nobody sharing each other's identities outside the group. And it gives us a nice peer support, which research has proven can greatly help with mental health, is having your peer support group. Additionally, the reason we call it a task force is that when the neurodiversity at IBM programs are looking for feedback to get actual points of views of autistic individuals, we hop on calls together. We actually have a weekly standing call, but we'll also hop on other calls together to discuss it. So if they say, what kind of phrasing, is the phrasing in this documentation good, is there something we can do to help you guys, we get together, collaborate, and pass on those ideas as a group. So it gives us a way to kind of have input, whereas a lot of times different neurodiversity programs kind of just use the internet to research, if any research is done at all, and then implemented without the point of view of actually autistic people. So that's been great. I love it from the peer support aspect, but it also helps get our voice out there to influence the initiatives going on internally.
Great. Thanks, Megan. And as you can see, this task force, it's very key to our program, and I reach out to them all the time for advice and guidance. So I really appreciate this group. So also in 2019, Nat Lykowski, another one of our coworkers, was able to secure an executive sponsor for us. Our BRG grew to almost 1,400 people. And we were able to do more neurodiverse program hiring this year. We hired about 30 people in Australia, Brazil, and Canada. And this included the SOC analysts that I mentioned earlier, as well as some testers and developers. And then this brings us to 2020. So earlier this year, our business case was approved, and that's when I was asked to be the program manager to really formalize our program and to continue the hiring that we've been doing. And so far this year, we've been able to hire 8 people in Canada and the UK, and they're in our security and our cloud organizations. And we have plans to continue hiring globally for the remainder of the year. All right, next chart, Casey, please. Okay, so I mentioned New Collar. This is something our prior CEO, Ginny Rometty, introduced just over 3 years ago. So New Collar jobs are jobs that don't require a 4-year degree, as what matters most really is the relevant skills that a person has. So I mentioned that the ND at IBM program is part of New Collar, and it's really a great fit with our New Collar work, which is about shifting the labor market and our organization's talent model to focus on skills and not just the traditional signals we've relied on in the past. So that means not systematically excluding talented people that may not have a degree, or people who've been out of the workforce and have a gap in their resume, or neurodivergent talent that's been overlooked for a number of reasons. We believe by tapping into this talent, we can build a competitively differentiated workforce. Our NT at IBM program mission is to build a global program that will provide, or that will include neurodivergent friendly hiring, development opportunities for new hires, and training for all employees. And to do this, we're taking advantage of the experiences, the best practices, resources, and training already available from the past 5 years of the work in this space, as well as creating additional resources to enhance the program to make sure all IBM employees, managers, and new hires have the information they need to be successful at IBM, and that they feel comfortable bringing their whole self to work, and to help make IBM a more diverse and inclusive company. And finally, our vision is to incorporate neurodivergent friendly hiring strategies into the mainstream so that it becomes the way we hire everyone and not a specific talent pool. And if we can turn to the next chart. And okay, I'm going to turn it over to Megan at this point. She's going to share why it's not only important, but very beneficial for companies to hire neurodivergent people and to hire in cyber, especially in light of the significant cyber skills shortage.
Yeah, so to begin with, there's a really large population, a large pool to pull from in terms of autistic adults. 85%, there's an 85% unemployment rate among college educated alone autistic adults, not to mention anyone who was unable to pursue a college education for a variety of reasons, but would still be interested in working full time. There's very much like the stigma of autistic people don't have the intellectual capability or things like that to be able to pursue work, but actually the IQ level and the functioning capabilities of most autistic adults is high enough to hold a full-time job. It's just managing to get and keep a job that leads to that unemployment rate. Additionally, once you do bring in that autistic workforce, there's a low turnover rate. The autistic employees are typically going to be more loyal to your company. Obviously, we have an inherent challenge with getting a job. So when we do get a job, we're obviously more likely to hold on to that job as opposed to assuming that we could get a job elsewhere, or that, especially if it's a good fit, assuming that we can find another place that will treat us the same way that our current employer does. And research shows that 33% of employers believe that their employees with disability are less likely to leave than those with a disability. In terms of a kind of new collar and needing the skill set, there is also evidence that new and different skill sets are brought to the workplace by autistic individuals. 32% of employers, according to NIST, reported this. And obviously, that's a very important part of the hiring process, is getting that diversity, those different ways of thinking. One of the analogies I've used in the past that I've read in a book is kind of like any sports team. When you're building a sports team, you're gonna be trying to find strong players, fast players, coordinated. You're finding all different skill sets. You know, you building a football team, you're getting the quarterbacks and the defenders and all the different positions, not just all the best quarterbacks in the world. That's going to do you no good when you approach an actual game. And then last benefit I want to point out, and again, these are just kind of a few statistics from different surveys. Like, I could go and get you a million other statistics, but these are some I wanted to highlight, is there's also a shorter training time. JP Morgan was one of the first programs, first companies to have a large autistic hiring program. And as a result, when they wrote up their report on the success of the program, one of the things they pointed out is that after 3 to 6 months, autistic workers were doing the work of people who took 3 years to ramp up and were 50% more productive. So it takes shorter time to train them up and an increased work output. So that's just one example of kind of how autistic employees may differ in a positive way. So in terms of hiring neurodivergent people, there's obviously strengths and weaknesses. It is labeled as a disability for certain reasons. And so in terms of the challenges, autism has a very large aspect as a social disability. So day-to-day communications can be a challenge, social interactions. I myself prefer not to work with clients or executives just because I know I'm lacking in social skills, and those are areas where good social skills would be considered beneficial. I struggle a lot with change too, change in management, change in how things operate. Eye contact, luckily with everything being remote, eye contact hasn't been as much of a challenge. And then, of course, one of the reasons this talk is being had, and one of the reasons there are specialized hiring programs for neurodivergent people, is the interview process can be challenging. I myself didn't face the same issues that a lot of my autistic colleagues have in terms of the interview process. But I know it is a major challenge, and one of the things that I've learned autistic people are struggling with when it comes to the hiring process. However, looking outside of those challenges, you begin to see the strengths that also come. The attention to detail, problem solving, pattern recognition, those kinds of skills are very heightened in autistic individuals. Again, we tend to be passionate and honest and loyal. The honesty can often be seen as brutal, but it works in terms of being providing constructive criticism and not just having everyone agree with things out of respect. You'll actually get constructive feedback. And then the passion and loyalty to a company that treats us right. It's very intense. And then the deep interest and intense focus kind of leads to that kind of output at work and high quality work. So to summarize the benefits, your company is representing yourself as a company that supports hiring diversely, especially with neurodiversity. There's a lot of statistics on how consumers are more likely to go to a company that they see provides social good, not just great products. We typically, autistic hires, while we can struggle in the beginning, most of us are very good at learning how to face certain situations and adapt on our end to face those situations. So while there may be an adjustment period for learning how to work in a full-time environment, once we do get work, we can be independent. You're not going to be hand-holding us the entire time. The loyalty we've mentioned, and then employee morale and pride. You know, just like you want to adjust your company so that you have happy employees, there's specific adjustments that you can make and to have that employee pride. For me to be able to say, you know, I truly, honestly love working for IBM, and a large part of that is because how they treat me. Next slide. So in terms of working with neurodiverse employees, these are kind of some bullets I put together to kind of, from the different aspects of how, depending on what your role is, how you can go about supporting your neurodiverse employees. The employers themselves, the company as a whole, should be promoting neurodiversity and looking into neurodiverse hiring initiatives to support that process. They should also be listening to their managers, employees, supporting them with whatever they need from the top down. And lastly, something that doesn't get talked about much, but that should be part of wider conversation, is mental health benefits, whether that be using sick time for mental health leave, not just because you're throwing up that morning, or ensuring that any insurance benefits cover things like therapy or counseling or medications for different cognitive disabilities. At a lower level, the managers, their main thing is to be patient and understanding. A lot of times managers have been managing people for decades and kind of have the way that they manage how they manage people. And so learning to manage with a different style in order to accommodate for that employee is important. And then acting as an advocate, obviously being higher up, being able to reach the employers at a higher level and advocate on behalf of the employee who may be seen as low level and not be able to get the same kind of traction internally. And then lastly, your coworkers can also support you. You can support your neurodiverse coworkers. I always highly encourage the coworkers to learn and ask questions. I'd rather you ask me about something I'm doing and point it out than just make assumptions or stick with stereotypes. So I'm always happy to answer any questions and kind of bring that bigger awareness. And then, like the manager, some patience and understanding. This coworker may be different than what you're used to working with, and just kind of keep that in the back of your mind that you may need to adjust the way you communicate with them in order for the interaction to go smoother. And the similar survey to that Dennis did earlier, when they asked employers, 56% of the employers they interview reported that the autistic employee adapted positively with no significant additional cost to employers. So a lot of times when you think about employer support for disabilities at a high level, there may be a lot of thought about, well, what's that going to cost? And honestly, when it comes to neurodiverse employees, not much. It's adaptations in the way communication occurs more than anything. Next slide. think this is you, Diane.
Okay, all right, great. Thanks, Megan. Lots of great information. So on this chart, we've compiled a list of our recommendations for a successful hiring program based on the experiences we've had during the neurodiversity journey that I took you through earlier. So the first one is to secure an executive sponsor. And what kind of hand in hand with that is to get approval for a business case. Both of these, as I mentioned, occurred for us and really helped us to be able to formalize our efforts earlier this year. ND training, it really should be required for everyone in a company, but definitely the hiring managers and the employees that are going to be working directly with the neurodiverse employees that are being hired. I mentioned Specialist Sterna. So we highly recommend utilizing an NGO like Specialist Sterna, at least for your initial hiring efforts. It is an additional expense, but we think it's really well worth it. And it really helps to get companies off to a solid start to being able to run their own programs. And then, as you heard, our efforts began with a BRG, which grew over time. And this BRG is providing support for the program and a large community within IBM, and it helps to spread the word about neurodiversity, and it helps with not only the awareness, but also acceptance. So that's been very important for us. And then my thanks to Megan and to Bill for creating our Actually Autistic task force. And as Megan expressed earlier, a really very important task force and board, not only for me as the program manager, but for her and her fellow neurodiverse employees. And let's see. It's also, and that group is also crucial for not only the guidance, but getting the buy-in from this community. And their motto, I don't know if we mentioned it before, but it's nothing about us without us. All right, and then Casey, if you can go to the next chart. Okay, so we have some resources listed here. So if you want to learn more about neurodiversity and cybersecurity, the link to the video documentary that I mentioned is here. As well as there's a business case video by Andrew Williams, really great video to watch. Megan has a presentation on strengthening your SecOps team by leveraging neurodiversity. And then we've included, there's a really good book and a playbook for employers who are interested in deploying a hiring program, both of which I highly recommend, as well as I've included Specialist Sterna's website here. We're going to share these charts as part of the replay, but you're also welcome to connect with Megan or me via LinkedIn, and we can share the resources with you there as well. And I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. Yep, and so we've got time for to take some questions.
Great, excellent. And I did post in the Zoom group chat that we will make the slide deck available at the same time this recording is ready. Is that's okay, Diane? I may just make that a PDF or something and send that out with the link to the recording.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, because it'd be easier to get those URLs.
Yep.
Great. Well, while you're getting your questions ready, I had one. You mentioned that utilizing an NGO, and I forget how you pronounce the specific group you mentioned, their name.
Specialist Sterna.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
For initial hiring efforts, can you talk about some of the sorts of things that they do as part of that initial hiring effort?
Okay, yeah, and it was founded in Denmark, and the Specialist Sterna is Danish for the specialist, so that's where that comes from. So they help with, they've got a lot of experience in neurodivergent hiring. Many of the employees at their company are neurodivergent themselves. So, as we talked about the Actually Autistic group, right? It's people who are autistic, providing guidance and support to companies. So they will come in and work with a company to provide training, right? To take a look at some of the roles that you have that might be available for neurodivergence. They help with sourcing. So they have a lot of relationships or will create relationships depending on, you know, if it's a specific location, create a relationship with a local organization that has neurodivergent talent. So in Michigan, it was the Autism Alliance of Michigan that the three of us partnered with to source the individuals that came in and were considered for the roles that we had in Michigan. So they help with the sourcing, they help with training. So we've developed some of our own training internally for ourselves, but they've got training that they provide to companies as part of that process. So that, I mean, that's really critical for managers and the employees that are going to be working with on the teams with them. They help with the interview process. So it's not a 1 hour interview, you know, video or in-person interview with a one-on-one, right? Or several of those that many of us go through when we're hiring, you know, interviewing for jobs. But we bring, well, pre-COVID, we would bring the candidates in and they could spend a day or several days or a couple weeks with the IBM team working side by side. So working on, you know, mini projects to see how the interactions went and to kind of evaluate them through this process and not just through that one, you know, one-on-one face-to-face interview. You know, as Megan mentioned, for some people, they can do that well, but for some that is very difficult. So we eliminate that from the process. And then also just helping with the, as you select the employees to make offers to and the onboarding process, they're providing guidance to both the employees as well as the employers and the managers as you go through that process. And you can also continue to work with them after the people have been hired, which we have done in both cases for different amounts of time. And that's, you know, they're very flexible with that. I think in one, I believe in Michigan, it was a 3-month support after the people were hired. And we also hired in Australia, a larger group. We hired 10 at one time in Australia, and they had a 1-year agreement. So any questions or concerns that came up during that year, or, you know, situations where, you know, it wasn't clear from the training how the manager should respond, we've got the ability to reach back to someone at Specialist Sterna to help answer our questions.
Great, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
We do have, so the National Cyber Watch Center's audience, for the most part, are academic institutions and primarily the frontline educators, right? That is folks at
Mm-hmm.
2- and 4-year schools that are teaching hands-on information security. Was there anything, or a slight sort of variation of this theme, or anything that either of you would want to say to those folks as it relates to this topic or this discussion?
Megan, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just say, like, if you do discover one of those students, I mean, I was very good academically. Some autistic people are, some aren't, just like neurotypical people. But if you do come across those students, I definitely say if you can kind of as a mentor role or helping them, like with contacts you have, kind of as a neurotypical advocate, especially when they begin the job hunting process, giving them references. And just like an employer would do, having patience and understanding with that student in the same way that an employer needs to with their employees, understand that there's learning differences and communication differences. So don't automatically dismiss that student. College, I didn't mind as much, but public school was pretty much a nightmare for me just because it was there's so much rigorous, like, this is how teaching occurs. And so anyone who falls outside of that teaching style kind of gets stuck. So yeah, just the exact same way that I say that the employers kind of may need to change 20 years of managing to help understand and support this individual. Teachers may have 20 years of teaching, doesn't mean that that teaching style is going to work for the autistic student.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Any questions? questions for Megan or Diane? Very quiet group here at 2:35 p.m. Eastern time.
Hey, Casey, it's Heather Ricciuto. I'll step in. Hey, Diane.
Hey, hi, Heather.
Diane's trusty sidekick over here. Yeah. I have a small comment, and then I have a question. So just in case there's anybody on the line who's never really heard the term business resource group before, or BRG, I just wanted to add that that's the term we use internally within IBM, but outside of IBM, the more commonly used term is ERG, or Employee Resource Group. So they're the same thing, just FYI. And then my question, I guess, is really for Megan. Do you think that educators could use this, the same kind of education that you and Diane have delivered here today? I mean, just on a broader scale, clearly there's work going on in industry at companies like IBM and EY and JP Morgan to build awareness around neurodiversity. But what about educators?
100%. Like I got through things and I mean, I'm still working on another degree now. So I managed to get past all the challenges I had. But it was very apparent to me, especially in hindsight, but even during the time, that these school systems are not designed to support neurodiverse individuals. So I've met plenty of autistic and ADHD and other individuals who dropped out of high school or college because they just couldn't do it anymore. The environment just wasn't suited for them. A lot of times, especially in the elementary through high school, you have teachers. It's that very common thing in childhood, especially if you're pre-diagnosis. I wasn't diagnosed till I was 12, so all of elementary and middle school, it was kind of that thing where I was good academically, but there was some troublemaking, or I'd get bored in class. And that's why I eventually switched to homeschooling, was just teachers didn't understand how I operated. So I was more likely to get in trouble than I was to succeed, despite being very successful academically, having that potential. So I definitely think the school systems, both public school and universities, are designed to teach neurotypical students, and it's not really the teacher's fault that they don't necessarily understand the differences. It's just a lack of understanding in a lot of cases, I think.
Mm-hmm. So Casey, going back to your question about whether Diane or Megan had any recommendations for educators, I think that we can all work together to build awareness in the world, whether it's within industry or it's within academia or what have you, with respect to the, what exactly neurodiversity is, what it encompasses, what it is not, et cetera, and to recruit allies for our, for the neurodivergent population, and just build awareness about the fact that they're very, Megan has highlighted all the great qualities like productivity and loyalty, et cetera. And I think we really can all do our part to build that awareness and allyship.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. And, and also, in a lot of the diversity conversations, at least, my take on it is, neurodiversity is oftentimes not included. It's the traditional, gender, ethnicity, race, age, and obviously we need all of those. So, sort of this is, opportunity to, to get people to think a little more broader about, diversity as well. And there are two follow-up questions, and they're sort of related. And the first one, I'll read the first one and then the second one, but they're really around marketing/recruiting. So the first question was, are there assessments we can give that would call out neurodiverse people to help us market cybersecurity to them as a training/vocation? And then the follow-up that's sort of related is the person says, I love this presentation. Quick question. I am interested in looking into building an assessment tool based on the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the NIST National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education and Cybersecurity framework. I'm curious if IBM or any of the participants have thought about how we do recruiting, not only the neurodiverse, but mid-career, older, more females, more underrepresented groups.
A lot of a lot of questions there. So I think some of, like Specialist Sterna, and I think there's other organizations. Integrate is another one. I think they have worked on this, and I'm not sure to what extent, but we could get more information on that. I don't know that was the first question to identify neurodiverse people or candidates? Or
Pamela, can you follow up in the chat with that, or you can unmute yourself if you like.
Yeah, I don't think I can see the chat.
I see. Okay, they're probably just coming to me.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it looks like
I'm unmuted. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you very much.
So I've actually had a lot of conversations in other meetings and webinars recently about assessments we can give to identify people who are particularly their thinking styles or their personalities are already pre-tuned to be good at cyber related activities and skills. And so it sounds like many neurodiverse people would fall into that bucket. And is there an assessment that is out there that would identify people with these kinds of skills, even just for the neurodiverse community or for a broader community?
Yeah, I'm not aware of one. And I don't know, Megan, if you're familiar with anything?
Not that I can think of. Yeah, I'm not really sure of a specific assessment that will evaluate that in terms of mindset, unfortunately.
I would think that maybe the cyber competitions might fall into that. So it's not an assessment tool per se, but there's Heather, the CPTC, right? Collegiate Pen Test Competition. And that's cyber teams working together to solve problems. And there's also the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, right? So you're seeing individuals work together on a team to solve cyber problems, right? And seeing how each person on a team thinks differently and what they each contribute to that problem-solving process, which we've used both of those competitions to help identify top cyber talent that we've then hired into IBM. So not an assessment per se, but a way of seeing individuals and how they take a, how they attack a cyber problem.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I can just share a personal anecdote. I have a family member who's on the spectrum, high functioning Asperger's, and that person's special interest is not computing, programming, electronics, but I've been teaching for 18 years and, had very little personal experience prior to, my family member being diagnosed on the spectrum, of high functioning Asperger's, for example, right? And, and what my personal experience and my professional experience is that when I've had students in my courses, and I've taught at the 2-year level, 4-year level, undergrad, grad, that when I've had specifically students whose special interest was electronics, computing, programming, anything tangentially related to those things that lend themselves to then being really solid foundations for cybersecurity, that was their special interest. They were really, quite frankly, some of my best students. And the things that really worked were to leverage, some of the social stuff could be difficult, right? And so, a strategy that worked very well for me was to really to leverage that student's special interests, and they became almost like a teaching assistant, and I could have them explain really quite frankly, very difficult concepts in very simple ways, and sort of, really just churn that special interest and passion into a strength. And, where, instead of it becoming this sort of adversarial type relationship where that person, their special interest, they know a lot. And, and that can create some friction within a class, right? It's the same person answering all the questions and whatnot. So that's just one probably oversimplified example, but it's worked very well.
I've seen one of the issues in terms of job posting kind of related to this idea of assessment and training is a lot of times the requirements in terms of education, having degrees or having experience. So the smartest people I know in the industry are some neurotypical, but also a lot of neurodiverse people who got a passion for cybersecurity, went on the internet and taught it to themselves. And that's why I kind of love what specialist Sterna does. Is a big part of their hiring process is showing the hands-on products. They don't just have a Q&A interview and then it's whoever did the best answering those questions and answers. They have a period of time in which the individuals applying for the job actually do work related to the job, and then the employer can view that. And I think that's better than any Q&A or better than any whiteboard drawing out, because a lot of the times, even though their resume section may be empty, and both in terms of experience in the industry and education, I know people who could have a blank resume, but they could do the job perfectly. And I always hate that because I see how hard some of my friends work, especially the neurodiverse ones who tried going to college and couldn't because of their neurodivergent. They can't sit in a classroom for 8 hours, yet they know more than I do because they sit and spend hours studying it by themselves in their room. And so I always hate when I see those people and they can't find jobs because they don't have a degree on their resume. So I think in some ways there needs to be a shift in how companies think in terms of their hiring and think of what their definition of qualified is.
Amen, Megan. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges in this whole workforce shortage space is just really the lack of innovation in not only hiring, but hiring strategies, but just recruitment. And I think part of it is organizations, they don't really have a sense, many don't have a sense of what it takes to be a good cybersecurity person, right? Especially technical people. So they don't have a sense of really how to, what's involved to become good in information security. They oftentimes don't have a sense of the capability, maturity of their own workforce, and then couple that with outdated and archaic hiring practices, and recruitment strategies, right? And you end up with this situation where people are essentially poaching a very small percentage. They think the way you solve this problem is you hire tip of the spear of the specialists, and I don't, I think what that becomes a competitive advantage for organizations that understand that they can look. You mentioned, Diane, you mentioned competitions. Many organizations look down on competitions as toys and games. Well, it's unfortunate because there's in the US alone, there are tens of thousands of students that could fill these open positions, right? It's a fraction of what we need, but it's tens of thousands that these organizations are not tapping into, right? And so my personal take on all of this, having done workforce development for a long time, is that it's going to continue to be a competitive advantage for organizations to get creative in their recruiting and hiring strategies, and those that don't are simply just not going to be able to stay competitive. So,
Right, definitely.
Dave asks, does bipolar fall under neurodiversity?
Yep. Sure, that's basically anything, like I consider it any sort of cognitive disorder, disability, however you want to phrase it. It's those ways, think of it as the person who looks 100% normal on the outside, but their brain's functioning so much differently than what a neurotypical is considered. So yeah, bipolar, schizophrenia, mood disorders too, personality disorders, ADHD, ADD, autism, and the list goes on and on.
Any other questions or comments?
Casey, earlier when you were talking about how, when we think of diversity, we tend to think of things like gender diversity and race and whatnot. And it made me think that neurodiversity is something that you generally can't see, right? And I think we all have to kind of think of diversity overall more broadly and come to the realization that you can't always see diversity.
Excellent. Megan's mom posted, I just need to say that Megan's managers at IBM have been exceptional in managing her quirks. So thanks for sharing.
That is true. They put up with me, as I'd say. So yes.
Thanks for sharing that, Megan's mom. Any other questions or comments for the group? Heather, to your comment about continuing, our partnership, IBM's been a valued partner of the National Cyber Watch Center, and we really do value that relationship. And I think one way in which we can make a real difference in this space, building on what Megan was just saying, was perhaps some real targeted efforts to hiring managers, right? And or even groups, right? There's the Society for Human Resource Managers, SHRM, and I mention them because they're local to me, so they're in DC, and they're a large association. I think close to 300,000 members, right? And I'm trying to think about those organizations that are one to many, where this sort of continued partnership, educating them around the sorts of things that we saw in this presentation can have a huge impact, as opposed to sort of the the one-offs, right? And there may be other, Heather, Megan, and Diane, there may be other groups like that and you probably thought about this, right? Where it makes sense to to get in front of.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I have started to an opportunity to reach out to students at colleges through some colleges that have students with disabilities groups already, right? To come out and speak to them, well, virtually speak to them about what we're doing and about our hiring program. But Heather, with what you mentioned, I think there's another side to that, and that's the teachers, right? And I hadn't thought about that before. So I think that's something we should consider. And to your point, Casey, from SHRM and other large organizations where you can really get this out to a lot of people. I mean, it's really about learning, right? Asking questions, reading information, and learning what neurodiversity is. And so I started this with the basic definition, because I found as I was talking to people, not everybody knew what it was. And so I'm going on talking and they're stuck on, they're not quite sure what I'm talking about. They're not quite sure what neurodiversity is. So that's why I've kind of backed up and started with that. So, well, any groups you can think of, Casey, where we might be able to partner and share this with them, please let us know.
Yeah, or any of the participants, if you know of groups, right, where there's sort of a one-to-many relationship, or large employers that you think may be open to this. The idea is to really start to make a difference in the hiring practices themselves, right? And so you can post those in the Zoom group chat, or you can email any one of us. That'd be appreciated.
One of the groups that I am now a part of, IBM's been a part of it. It's Autism at Work. Microsoft leads it. And in order to be part of their employer roundtable that meets monthly, a company has to have a neurodiverse program in place for a year. So with Paul and Andrew's efforts, we were able to be part of that. And then this year I joined it and attend these calls. Well, when I first looked at the list of companies, which is quite a few, many of them are IBM's competitors. And I thought it was very interesting that I'm going to get on a call with a lot of IBM's competitors, right? Well, you get on that call and the competition aspect is gone. And it's that all the representatives from all those companies are working together, asking each other questions with difficult situations or problems, or for advice or for guidance or for their playbook, or how did they start their program? What did we do? What were we doing with COVID this year, right? So all the employees moving to work at home, that was a huge issue. So we get on these calls and talk about different solutions to these problems, and just really sharing openly as one community. And it's actually been a very great experience to be part of that team.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Great story. How about for the participants? What was it about this topic that made you want to attend this webcast? You can unmute yourselves, or if you're not comfortable with that, you can go ahead and type your reply in the Zoom group chat. I'm curious. Give it a bit here for people to unmute and to reply. So one person said, I'm in recruiting and this is a topic that's rarely touched on. Interesting. I'm interested in finding people specially qualified for cyber training, said another.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a one data point to validate our let's get in front of the folks that are doing recruiting and hiring, right? And try to make a difference in that way. Well, good.
See a virtual road show in your future, Diane and Megan.
I mean, I was speaking at conferences at least once every 3 to 4 months on the topic prior to the shutdown. So I haven't done any virtual conferences yet. This is my first virtual talk since COVID, but I was trying to spread it beforehand. I didn't get it in front of many executives, and it was more about working with the individuals than the hiring process. But I definitely think this was a good topic, and I am grateful for getting to give it.
We're grateful, and it's also nice just to have a space where folks can ask questions and feel safe to learn a little more. There's another response. There was a great diversity conversation in California. I wanted to hear additional insights as an employer and a company that specializes in workforce development. So, well, good. Well, getting folks outside of our normal, higher ed, frontline cybersecurity educators join. I appreciate that. And somebody else said a number of my students are on the spectrum, along with one of our kids' classmates. So, those were the reasons those folks wanted to join. Well, Megan or Diane, any last comments before we call it a day?
Just thank you very much for inviting us to speak today. We're both very passionate about this and really welcome the opportunity to share today. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And as I said earlier, once we do some post video editing or some cleaning up, if you will, of this recording, I'll be using the same platform that you all use to register for the event to send out a follow-up email, and that will include a PDF of the presentation slide deck along with a link to this recording, and you're free to share that far and wide, and we encourage that. And want to thank both of our presenters, Diane and Megan. I want to also thank Heather for your continued support, and thank all of you for joining us today. And check your inbox for future webcast invitations and links to today's recording and the presentation slide deck, as I mentioned. And thank you all for all you're doing to keep yourself, your family, and others safe and healthy. And we'll see you on the next National Cyber Watch Center webcast. Take care, all.